Assalamu alaikum. So, friends, inshallah, together we're actually going to be continuing to do tafsir. Now, here's one thing is that this ayah is, Surah Nisa, but it's really detailed, and you could see that here. So, I've got right here Tafsir al-Qurtubi, and in Tafsir al-Qurtubi, he goes in a lot of details. Don't worry, I know you're seeing in Arabic, but I'll actually be explaining what this is saying, because in order to do the right tafsir and not make a tafsir of your own, you would really have to go back to the books of tafsir to make sure that, especially if we're talking about an ayah that relates to rulings. Let's explain this tafsir right there. So the ayah says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. O you who believe, do not approach. And we're going to talk about taqrabu here, what it means. Salah, prayer, when you are in a state of, intoxication. And so that you would be capable of knowing what you're really saying, and not in a state of janaba, which is the state of when a person had been intimate before, unless and of course, before taking a shower, إلا عابري سبيل, unless you were just passing by, that is the masjid, until you would make a complete shower. And if you were ill, or if you were on a journey, or if any of you were to come from the low place, we're going to talk about each and every single detail. And or if you were to touch women, and of course, we'll talk about whether it's a metaphor or whether this is a literal wording, and you did not find water, then use tayammum, which is dry ablution, as an alternative to not finding water, and would wipe with your faces. In other words, wiping your hands with your faces, and even with your wiping your hands. For the Lord Almighty is all forgiving and all, He'll be dismissing your sins. But here's one thing. Although this ayah might seem like it's so straightforward, there are actually so many different details to that ayah. Let's see some of the details. Now, al-Qurtubi actually said that there were 44 different questions or matters or things that need to be discussed within this ayah. It's one ayah, but al-Qurtubi actually goes into 44 different issues to discuss about this ayah. So just when you thought you knew tafsir, you were like, well, this is a straightforward ayah. Why did you need 44 different bullet points and different points to talk about it? Tells you that's what fiqh is. That's what the knowledge and ilm is. So let's see a number of different things that he talks about here. He says, number one, that this discourse, or this at least, was directing the words at the believers, because they used to perform the salah, and then, they were actually drinking at the time. Now, mind you, drinking was actually part of the Arabic culture, in where it was something that they did poetry on. It was something that they regarded as an honorable thing to do, believe it or not. They regarded that to be a person that loves to drink, it was an honorable thing to do. It gives you dignity, it gives you power, it makes you cool in today's terms. It makes you cool, it makes you somebody that is trendy, ironically. In fact, let's just see this hadith. Abu Dawood, and I like this. This is really important. I know for people that are not familiar with the books of Islamic studies books, this is called the matan, and this is called right there the hamish, the footnotes. Now these footnotes are pretty important. Why? Because when you're actually looking at this, you're seeing right there, it says Abu Dawood narrated that Umar ibn Khattab had said, when the prohibition of drinking was revealed, Umar ibn Khattab actually said, okay, this is Abu Dawood saying that Umar ibn Khattab had said, when the prohibition was revealed, then he actually cried out and made the dua, Ya Allah, reveal about alcohol a clarification that would just give us a complete healing. So the ayah was revealed in Surah Al-Baqarah. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ. They would ask you about al-khamr, or they would ask you about alcohol and also gambling, which is in ayah 219. So Umar ibn Khattab, when this ayah was revealed, he still felt that it wasn't clear enough to understand the ruling of alcohol. So that's when he did it again and said, Ya Allah, bring about a final clarification that would bring us a complete healing to understanding alcohol. So that's when the ayah was revealed. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la taqrabu as-salata wa antum sukara. That's when the ayah was revealed. Oh, you who believe, don't approach prayer when you are in a state of intoxication. But still, right there, he did it again, and he said, Ya Allah, bring us a complete clarification. Now, when this ayah was revealed, which was actually the ayah that we're working on right here in Surah Nisa, ayah number 43, when it was revealed, the Prophet ﷺ had sent out the different Sahaba to announce that no one, when they're in a state of intoxication, should actually perform salah. That was the stage in where to get them into the process of leaving alcohol entirely. It was a stage where at least 5 times a day you didn't want to approach alcohol. So what were they doing? Well, they were drinking at the end of the night, and that way they would be awake and fully awake for salah throughout the day. But Umar ibn al-Khattab was still feeling that there wasn't enough clarification on the issue and how we were supposed to relate to alcohol. So he cried out again, and he made the dua again, Ya Allah, bring about a clear clarification about alcohol that would bring us the complete answer in the ease. Well, that's when the final stage of drinking or alcohol was actually revealed in ayah number 91 in Surah Al-Ma'idah, in where it gave the complete wording, فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. Are you now done, finished with drinking? That's when Umar ibn Khattab said, Intahayna. Now we got the complete understanding. Now here's one thing. This is basically to bring about the process in where the process of the gradual process of alcohol in Islam was taking from one stage to another, in where not only was alcohol, let's say, going to a gradual process until the final ruling had happened, but we actually have a number of different things. And the most famous one is visiting graves, in where the Prophet ﷺ had actually said, كنت قد نهيتكم عن زيارة القبور ألا فزوروها. فإنها تذكركم بالآخرة. I had prevented you and prohibited you from visiting graves. Now visit the graves, for it reminds you of al-akhirah. So here's the thing, is that in the early stages of Islam, you could see that there were a number of different things that were basically getting the Muslim community to be able to adopt the Islamic rulings, because certainly the society was actually not ready to adopt the Islamic rulings entirely. In fact, there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually told the Sayyidah Aysha, if the first things that were revealed in Islam were do not drink, do not commit zina or adultery or fornication, then the people would have actually objected and said, well, that's what we're going to practice, just to oppose the Islamic revelation and to oppose the Islamic basically divine revelation, or at least to oppose Islam, to bring about any kind of a way to eliminate Islam from the society. So he said the first things that were revealed were for ayatun min al-mufassal. The first things that were revealed were actually ayat from the different mufassal. In other words, ayat from different shorter surahs that brought in the foundations for aqidah. So that's why Sa'id ibn Jubayr, who was actually the scholar that was, let's say, assassinated by al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, Sa'id ibn Jubayr died 95 Hijriya. And he said the first thing that during the pre-prophetic era, that they were basically given certain orders, certain prohibitions, and they were drinking during the early times of Islam. And then, of course, the ayah was revealed, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. The first things that were revealed, they would ask you about alcohol and gambling, basically. But then the ayah was laying out the foundation that, well, there's actually a lot of harm in them, but there's also some benefit. Now, here's one thing. From this ayah, the scholars of Fiqh derived a very important legal maxim. The legal maxim was that in general, when you've got a benefit and you also have harm, you're going to consider the harm over the benefit. In other words, you're really going to be weighing the harm and the benefit, and what you're going to be considering. إذا تعارض المفسدتان روعي أعظمهما ضررا بارتكاب أخفهما. Whenever you have two evils that are opposing one another, what you're going to consider is basically the bigger harm / the bigger evil, even if you were to commit a little evil. So in that situation, yes, we're going to curtail certain freedoms, which is drinking from, in this case, we're going to curtail certain freedoms. Why? To get to the bigger benefit for the society, which is to ensure that the society is actually living in a complete sober mind and they're capable of doing what is actually important for themselves as an individual level and, of course, at a society level. So they would actually drink, they actually drank alcohol still, even when this ayah was revealed, and they said, well, we're drinking it for the good that it has within it, probably financial good, economical prosperity that was probably in it. And they said, well, our intention is to actually drink for a good cause. Yes, they were actually drinking for a good cause. Now, mind you, look at that. We could easily manipulate ourselves and say, well, we're doing it for a good cause. You know, imagine, you're talking about the US, a lot of the liquor stores are actually owned by the government, and it would be said that it was to bring about some income and a good budget for the city hall. And of course, it was said it was for a good cause. And you could see, hey, even the Sahaba fell in that. They said, yes, okay, yeah, we recognize that there's a lot of harm in it and some good, but we're doing it for a good cause. We're trying to eliminate all the evil that it carries within it, but we're doing it for a good cause. They thought the intention would suffice to make sure that they're eliminating all the evil, therefore it would make it for a complete good cause. And that's when, at one point, now mind you, the Sahaba were actually here praying together. And who was actually praying? It was Ali ibn Abi Talib. He was the one to lead the salah, and they were reading قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. Oh, you who believe, I worship what you worship. That's when the ayah, of course, the Sahaba were all drunk, including Ali ibn Abi Talib. That's when the ayah was revealed. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى. Oh, you who believe, don't approach or don't engage in the prayer when you're intoxicated. Well, that's when they basically said, well, then in that situation, we can drink it outside of prayer. Then outside of prayer, it should be fine as long as you're not praying when you're fully intoxicated. That's all that matters. Well, that's when Umar ibn Khattab felt that there was something that's not enough, that there was something about alcohol that was further than just not approaching it while you're praying. So that's when the ayah إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم العداوة والبغضاء, that shaitan actually wants to instill between you or within the society animosity and also hatred, animosity, hatred, diversity, division, etc. But then you could see that the society itself was fully strong in its deen, that when the ayah was revealed, they just said intahayna. In another hadith, it described that these people that were so heavily addicted to alcohol were then giving up all that addiction for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and literally breaking all the jugs of alcohol till it was flowing like rivers in the streets of Medina. Well, that's because their iman was so strong that even if there was some addiction, they were willing to give it up for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, it's really important to relate to it because there are so many different things that we could be just so attracted to and just so connected with in our lives that it is really for your iman that you're willing to give it up. You're willing to give it up really for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what true ikhlas is. Ikhlas is not only to do something for the sake of not having people praise you for it, but ikhlas is also that you're doing something to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, here's one thing. You could see, I wanted to go back to this right here, which is actually called the footnotes. And when you see, let's look at number 5. So this says number 5, let's go to number 5. And here he says, this is right there, 3670, and this is sananihi. So it would say, well, right there, Sunan Abu Dawood would be, this is the hadith number. And of course, he would tell you that what is in the 2 quotations, which quotations is we talking about? Oh, there we go. Except that isn't actually included. So here we go. These are the hasanatain right there, that this is not included in the hadith, but he'll tell you right there. So it was also narrated by Musnad Ahmad. Musnad Ahmad, another hadith, and a very important. So this one's actually in almost 6 volumes. This one is almost, 6 volumes as well. In Nasa'i is a little larger. It's basically almost 8 volumes in his Mujtaba right there. And you could see he's basically putting out the different resources for you. That way you won't feel that, okay, this is something where it is sourceless, all right? So here we go. Let's see another thing. I want you to see for those the other students, when you actually see this one, I'm going to zoom out for you so you could actually see the resources right there, okay? Because remember, we said we recognize that you're really smart students, so we're not going to be just dismissing that. I want you to see here. It says yunhaw. Number 2, let's see here. It says fi dal wa zay yantahu. What is dal and zay? So this book, okay, has other manuscripts. So when the author wanted to do what is tahqiq is basically he would compare the different manuscripts. He'll have, let's say if he says dal and zay, he'll have one manuscript that he will label as meme or alif or ba or ta, probably the first manuscript he found in Turkey, the other manuscript he found in Leiden in Germany, the other manuscript he probably found in Al-Maktab al-Khaldiyya in Al-Quds, the other manuscript he probably found in the library in London, and then he got these manuscripts and he'll compare the manuscript for Tafsir al-Qurtubi or the whatever book he's working on, and he'll tell you what every single manuscript, because remember, when they actually had these books, when they had these books scribed and written, they actually used to do handwriting. So it was really a personal handwriting, and they didn't have printing machines like they have today. So it was handwritten, and that's why they would have these manuscripts. So he would tell you what they found in other manuscripts for this particular word, and he'll note it down for you that in other manuscripts for the exact same book, that they actually have different wording. So this is what this is. So therefore you would recognize, so for those that know Arabic and are capable of going back to these resources, I want you to be able to understand these resources and not think of it as, oh, this is all just some kind of symbols that I don't understand. Now you know these symbols. So how do I figure out these symbols, and what is manuscript Dal, Zay, whatever manuscript? You would go back to the first volume. In the first volume, he'll go in details in the introduction and tell you each and every single volume, where he got it from, and all the different codes for that particular volume in order to help you get to that particular volume if you are needing to do so. Okay, so this is just one thing. All right, so let's see. Let's continue right here. So we're still really talking about this ayah, at least the context of this ayah in general, to help us understand the relationship of it. Now, here's one thing. He actually wanted to indicate one piece of a very important relationship, which is actually, he said, وجه الاتصال والنظم بما قبل. So what does that actually mean? So you could see that this ayah right there, let's look at the context. So the context is really going back to this ayah. So he says, when you look at this ayah, it talks about those that would spend for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and those that would not spend for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if they were to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Judgment Day and spend for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Lord Almighty does not oppress anyone that invests for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not even if it was the smallest iota. And then it takes you into, well, even when other people are oppressing you, remember that the Lord Almighty is going to have each and every single person stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold them accountable, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will actually have the prophets and the messengers be witnesses upon the people. But then it takes us into, oh, you believe, don't approach prayer while you're actually intoxicated. How did it jump from talking about Judgment Day and speaking about all these things to actually getting to Salah? How did we jump from this topic to the other topic? And this is important because there is a very important book, and that is basically al-Biqai. Al-Biqai, we said, where did we say he was from? Who remembers where he was from? Burhan al-Din al-Biqai. He's actually from Lebanon. And of course, well, he was also in Syria as well. But his book is actually called نظم الدرر في تناسب الآيات والسور. The نظم الدرر, I love the name. So what does نظم الدرر actually mean? نظم الدرر actually means that the design of the pearls, in how the ayat, the verses in the Quran, are relating to one another. In other words, he's trying to emphasize, maybe I could actually show you what that book looks like, right? That'll be really interesting. And can we actually get to that book? So let's see. Here we go. So this is Nazm al-Durar. It's actually in a couple.
Can I ask you a question? Sorry. For Baqai, was he has a, is he the same one who has a book in Hadith?
It is the same one. It is the same
Okay.
one. Of course, it is the same one. But you know, when you actually look at their books in tafsir and you look at their books in hadith, they try to, as much as they can, to distinguish the sciences to make it into a specialty. Not always did they necessarily master all the different sciences altogether. So you will have, For example, some scholars will say, well, yeah, although they wrote in hadith, but they're not the best masters in hadith. They'll more be recognized for their contribution in tafsir than actually their contribution
Okay.
in hadith or
Jazakallah khair.
وإياكم. So even though they might have actually written in different sciences, but some scholars will actually consider that they were actually better masters in one field than another. So you'll find that very frequently. You'll find that very frequently. Anyhow, so can I actually get to this book? You can. It's actually available in the a library called the Maktab al-Waqfiyya, but it's also available. I'm going to take you to this. This one is called, I'm going to take you to Mawqa' al-Tafsir, and I love that website. And you can actually get to, let's see this one right here. Okay, look at it. You could, I hope it doesn't do what it did last time. There it goes. It opened up. This website is actually a great website. Why? Because it actually has all the different, let me, take me to the Arabic part of it. Okay, let's say, maybe it can take me to, takes you, oh yeah, there we go. So if you want the Arabic side, I'm going to take you to the Arabic side, to the English side. It doesn't always have those translations. So let's go right there. We're going to click on the tafsir. And here's one thing. Although, yes, you will have a tafsir. I'm just going to here zoom out, okay, just so that you would be capable of seeing it. And let's say, look at this. These are different kinds of tafsir. Okay, different kinds. So this is telling you the main books of tafsir, the main books of Ahl Sunnah, the main books of tafsir for the Sufis, the main books of Salafis, the main books that are simplified tafsir, the main books for basically the Ithna Ashari, it's kind of Shia, the main books for tafsir Zaydi, main books for Ibadi, and etc. Well, give me all the tafsir. So then it would take you to the main books of tafsir. But here's one thing. No, I don't want you giving me any specific group of tafsir. I want to choose myself. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this gold right there. You know what, ladies? Each and every single one, like this one is 21 volumes. This one is almost 30 volumes. This one right here is actually in 6 huge volumes. And I mean huge volumes. This one right here is 20 volumes. Let's see this one. This is 20 volumes right there. These are volumes right at the tips of your finger. Let's see some more books. And of course, each and every single one of these is a huge tafsir right there. And they just gave it to you. Look at this one, man. This one is awesome. It's a black copy, and it's almost in, I think, 18 volumes or so. So about that. Oh, that Sharon is one of my favorite. Although he didn't actually write the tafsir, he gave it as lectures, but it was scribed in almost 20 volumes. And right there, they'll give it to you right there. This one's actually a small one, but it's a simplified tafsir, and it's actually in maybe 4 or 5 volumes, somewhere around there, but it's actually right there, right at the finger of your tips. And remember, so if we were to actually count all these volumes for the tafsir right there, we're actually looking at almost, I would say, give or take, maybe 500 volumes of books of tafsir. Well, let's go to our friend who's actually al-Biqai, and what I wanted you guys to see, okay? Let's see, where's al-Biqai right there? And let's see if I can find him really quick. Can I find him really quick? If you ladies find him, tell me you just saw him. Oh man, they're just tahrir with tanweer. This one is huge. This one's gold. It's in 20 volumes. Yeah, right there. And just going to, where's al-Biqai? Now I can't find him. Okay. You know, when you want something, it just doesn't come out, right? Well, we're going to take any tafsir. Okay, we're going to take any tafsir so you could actually see it. Even though I wanted al-Biqai, but right now it's just
I can see the
you could see it? Where did you see it?
Go down 1, 2, 3, 4. 885 Hijri.
Good job, good girl. Look at that, smarty. Okay, so let's say we're going to go to Surah Nisa. It still doesn't open until you actually hit ard right there. And this is ayah number 43. Let's go to ayah number 43. Come on. Good job. Here we go. Here's ayah number 43. It won't open up till you actually click this. Here we go. So there we go. And here we go. It basically opens up and you'll be able to see it. You'll be able to see all of that and that he was actually talking about. And I'll just summarize what he said. I'm going to go back to what we actually had and I'm going to summarize what he said, okay? Because, here we go. So what he was, and this is al-Qurtubi right there, and he said, well, the way in how this ayah is actually, number ayah 43, is connected with the rest of the ayat, he said it's actually relating to this ayah right here. So remember, the Quran, it takes you into different stations in understanding your Islam. Think of it as gives you a big vision, a big picture, but then to explain the big picture, it'll take you station 1, station 2, and station 3 in order to create a complete vision. Think of it as when you have a honeycomb. When you have a honeycomb, you'll get, different little tiny combs, little tiny pieces in order to get a complete sweet honey that actually contains all the richness. And that's where he said, well, that ayah is actually telling you, well, what is that ayah? And worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and don't associate any partners with him and treat your parents in kindness and even your relatives and the needy, well, the orphans and the needy and even the neighbors, etc. And then it takes you into إن الله لا يحب من كان مختالا فخورا, that the Lord Almighty dislikes people that are walking in arrogance, people that have arrogance in their hearts, and then it takes you different things that could actually lead to arrogance. Number 1 is basically starts with wealth, in where you want selfishness. You basically just want property to yourself. You just want everything, every ownership to be to yourself. And of course, being selfish, being stingy, all of that is actually leading you to having the centricity around your own self. And then it takes you into taking that other piece of it in where, well, when you're having that centricity around yourself, you're not recognizing others, and that's going to lead you to not recognize even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in order to treat and do that inner healing, you need to get out of that zone, from you seeing yourself as the center to you seeing others by recognizing, 1, your parents, recognizing your siblings and your relatives, recognizing the orphans, recognizing the needy, recognizing your neighbors, recognizing the people that are stranded, recognizing the slaves, even those that are seen as secondary citizens, etc. Once you recognize, you learn how to get out. You learn how to get out of that corner or that centricity that is focused on yourself, and you get out and see the real orbit of where you're at. That's when you'll be capable of recognizing the nucleus of that orbit, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the orbit, yes, there's a nucleus, but the orbit is actually going at a certain speed, at a certain acceleration, at a certain direction. That direction is al-yawm al-akhir. To get to Yawm al-Akhir, you need to recognize that what you're really getting to is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, you need to, in order to give up on dunya, or in order to, sorry, let me switch it. In order to get to al-Akhirah, you need to give up on dunya. It won't go. You cannot contradict yourself and it won't go right if you're holding on to the dunya, but you're wanting akhirah. That doesn't work. To go to akhirah, to get to Jannah, you need to really prove that you're giving up on dunya. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you, وَأَنفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَهُمُ اللَّهُ أَنفَقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَهُمُ اللَّهُ, that they would actually أنفقوا, they would actually spend for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is spending? Spending, yes, indeed, it is literally to give zakat, charity, etc. But metaphorically, it would basically mean that the person is giving up on dunya. Because what in nafaqah really means, yes, it means spending, but it also means giving up. It's basically the trade-off. You need to give up on your dunya in order to get to akhirah. You need to reduce from your focus on dunya, and you're willing to basically leave whatever is in dunya in order to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِهِمْ عَلِيمًا. Now here's one thing. Many times when you're feeling that you're giving up on dunya, you would feel that this is probably just too much on me, that I'm feeling, well, maybe this is me oppressing myself, etc. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, listen, we're not just talking about justice here, but we're actually taking you into a higher level. Justice is, yes, you're taking this much and I'm giving you kind of like an equity. You're giving up on that much, and in replacement of what you had given up on, I would give you the compensation to really equalize the amount of the amount that you had gave up on. That's basically justice. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually taking you to a higher level and telling you, well, we're not just talking about justice, but think of every single contribution that you would contribute in. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not whatsoever disregard any contribution, even if it was the smallest contribution, even if it was the size of an atom or the size of an iota, even if some might actually regard it as weightless, or might regard it as, well, this is just really not a big deal, don't even bring it up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that no, He'll actually compensate you with or for whatever you had contributed in, with multiplying the reward. So we're not just talking about here justice, but we're also talking about ihsan. Now, the second piece, in where even when you would relate with the people in front of you, recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not. If people had abused you, Allah will not abuse you, so contribute. And remember that you're going to stand right before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, there's going to be that moment. Even the prophets are going to be witnesses upon you. They're going to say, we delivered the message. We told them that this life is not the end of it, and that we're going to be meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, since we're talking about meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most important thing let's go back to the ayah, for worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and recognizing that you'll meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, well, recognize your relationship in what is the foundation of meeting Allah, salah. So that's how coherent and how this ayah is related with the rest of the ayah that had come before this ayah. لا تقربوا الصلاة. You want to have a personal relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You want to have that closeness. Now, here's one thing. When you look at that, لا تقربوا, القرب is, yes, it's to get near or it's to approach, but it also means something else, which is actually when you are mutalabbis. What is mutalabbis? Mutalabbis actually comes from the root la bi sa, which actually means to wear. But this is not talking about wearing a garment. But when you, in Lugha Arabiya, when you say labisa, it basically means to wear something. But in Arabic, it actually means to embody something. All right, embody something. So when they looked at garments and clothes, they saw that the garments would embody you in where it becomes this coating that basically becomes you. So illibas would be the garment to basically shape it your body. It basically embodies you. So here, when you say la taqrabu salah, it's basically taking you, well, how do you embody salah? So how do I embody it? Well, how are you going to embody it if we're basically looking at you when you are intoxicated? So what's the most important thing about embodying salah? حتى تعلموا ما تقولون. It's to learn what you're saying. Well, this is important. In order to embody salah, in order to embrace salah, in order to be connected to it, you have to learn what the words are saying. And this is important. The key to enhancing your iman is basically learning your Islam. The key to growing in your deen is to actually learn what the words of the Quran, the words of the Hadith, the words of those that had embraced the light of all of that. You would actually learn it, you would process it, you would relate to it. So a couple of questions here. Majority of the scholars, they basically said, وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى. Is this actually talking about a person going into intoxication? Or is this actually talking about, well, something else? So the first group of scholars, they basically said, well, no, you cannot actually take the words out of their literal form. And sukara, one, by context, when they were heavily attached to drinking, and this was actually talking about real intoxication, real drinking, and it's not talking about something else. The other group of scholars, which are really, there are a smaller group of scholars here. You could see his name is al-Dhahak. Okay, al-Dhahak, he basically said, well, actually, this is not talking about intoxication per se. So what was it talking about? He actually said, well, this is actually talking about sleep and not that. And they said, well, how did you get there? He said, well, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, if any of you were to get sleepy, then let them sleep until sleep goes away, because they don't know. Perhaps they would wake up, well, they wouldn't be awake, but he might actually, instead of praying to ask for forgiveness, they might actually, due to sleepiness, due to being sleepy, they might actually start swearing at themselves and perhaps saying the wrong thing. Another scholar, let me give you an idea about al-Dhahak. So al-Dhahak, his name is Dhahak ibn Muzahim. He actually had a main book of tafsir, and he was actually known to be an important scholar. You would see his name frequently. He actually died 102 Hijriya, and it's really important to actually learn about some of these scholars. Ubaida actually said, well, actually it means haqin. Haqin, what does that even mean? Il-haqin is the person that has the call of nature, feeling that they need to use the bathroom. Okay, they're feeling that they need to use, whether it's number one or number two, that's al-haqin. So where did you get that from? He said, is-sukar actually means the person who's needing to use the bathroom. And where did you get that from? He said, well, there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, لا يصلين أحدكم وهو حاق. He said, we've got a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said that none of you shall pray when they're actually having the urge to use the bathroom. Or in another hadith, ضَمٌ بَيْنَ فَخِذَيْهِ, or they're squeezing their buttocks or their thighs in order to probably prevent the urge of nature. So you could see, let's just see this hadith. Here he says, أخرجه أحمد. Look at this number of hadith in Musnad Ahmad. And let's see, Al-Hafiz fi al-Taqrib said that this hadith is actually ضعيف. Who's Al-Hafiz? Al-Hafiz is Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar. He actually said, well, this hadith is actually weak. But here, the person that actually did, who's actually called, let's see who the scholar, this is page 331. I'm going to let you see who is actually after writing all these footnotes. Let's go back. So the person to do what is called a tahqiq is basically called Dr. Abdullah ibn Abd al-Muhsin al-Turki. And of course, he had these friends that actually helped him do that. Let's go back to 331 again. So now you guys could see what we're doing. All right. And he basically said, well, actually, this hadith does have other evidences, other reports that were similar to this. So he disagreed with Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar and said, actually, there are some other evidences and other reports that supported that the Prophet ﷺ had actually said, don't pray when you're in a state for the call of nature. And he said, well, we've got this hadith narrated by Sayyidah Aysha that the Prophet ﷺ, لا صلاة بحضرة الطعام ولا وهو يدافع الأخبثان. That the Prophet ﷺ said, quote, narrated by Sayyidah Aysha, quote, that you should not pray when food is served or when the two different contaminants are basically urging you. So in that situation, they basically said, we've got an evidence. So the other scholars, let's see, Al-Qurtubi said, well, as to what الضحاك, that it is sleep, or even what Ubaidah had said, that it was basically that you're probably not going to be focused, etc. He just said the whole idea is to leave anything that might distract you from salah, and that you're supposed to come with your heart completely aware, with you being basically completely focused on your salah, and you're avoiding whether sleep or whether the call of nature or whether it's an actual intoxication from basically having your mind be sober. So he said it's basically just leave everything that might distract you, whether we're talking about sleep or whether we're talking about hunger, whether we're talking about call of nature, and which is why, I would agree, definitely. I mean, who am I to actually say I would agree? But you could see he didn't necessarily, and this is important, he didn't necessarily say, well, they're wrong. How could that actually be a metaphor? No, this is wrong. He basically said, no, they're actually right. But the whole idea is not an issue of intoxication only, but it includes every single action, every single reason that might distract you from doing it. So what's the evidence? He said, well, look at the ayah. Let's continue. حتى تعلموا ما تقولون. He said, look at the ayah. It basically said that the main reason, the whole analogy behind this is that you would be capable of understanding what you're saying. So in other words, if anything is distracting you from the main purpose of all of this, then in that situation, it would be simply as falling within this category in where your mind is not in complete awareness of what it's doing. And therefore,
would that be another reason to turn off your phone?
There you go. That would be another reason. Turn off your phone, or probably, hey, turn off the food if it's cooking, because then you're distracted. You're not completely focused. And this is important because the whole idea is really to get to al-khushu'. Let's look at this ayah. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises the believers who الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون, those that are in a state of khushu' within their prayer. What is khushu'? You're understanding what you're reading. You're embracing salah entirely with your mind, with your words, with your heart. And that's what khushu' is. It's to really be engaged, mind, heart, and soul, to recognizing your salah. And that's why you could relate with الخشوع حتى تعلموا ما تقولون. Ibn Abbas says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. He actually said, it's actually mansukh. What is mansukh? Mansukh is abrogated. What is abrogated? Abrogated or abrogation can only happen to law. You cannot abrogate a fact. What is a fact? A fact relates to, let's say we're talking about information about Allah. Let's say we're talking about information about the nations of the past, what happened to Prophet Musa, what happened to Prophet Isa, all this information. That can never get abrogated because it's a fact of something. But Islamic legislature, or at least, and not necessarily just Islamic, but law can get abrogated because there could be, one, a gradual process in how the different laws were revealed, just like when we're talking about alcohol. Two, certain laws can be canceled because it was in the process of making a certain law, just like hijab. In the beginning, for 18 years, hijab was not actually obligatory on Muslim women. For 18 years starting from the first bi'tha, when Islam started. 18 years later is when hijab really started. And that actually should inspire us to learn more when we want to do da'wah. What do you really want to start with in teaching people their Islam? Do you really want to start in teaching them about what is a bid'ah? Do you really want to start out with teaching them about the rulings of hijab and all of that and whether niqab is obligatory or not? It's like, well, wait a minute. They're still learning about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even when you're talking about the history of Islamic revelation, it didn't actually start from there. In fact, hijab was not obligatory until 18 years from the time of Bi'tha. 18 years. Now, mind you, the whole Islamic the whole birth of the Prophet ﷺ, it took 23 years. 23 years in total. Okay? 18 years. Hijab was not obligatory. So you look at that, you could learn really that process that Tears ibn Abbas, he said, well, this ayah in Surah Al-Ma'idah actually abrogated this ayah that we're working on in Surah Nisa, ayah number 43. Well, here's one thing. Of course, it wasn't just that particular ayah, but you could see that the ayah, فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ, which is the final ayah that was revealed in regards to drinking. Let's see what ayah they made it easy for us, and they basically said, well, let's see, where was it? Where was it? We had it here. There we go. فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ, that it was Surah Al-Ma'idah ayah number 91. But that was actually the abrogating ayah. They don't, it's not that they basically had a difference. It's that sometimes some people might actually choose to answer, let's say, more comprehensive answers, and some people like to be more particular, but they all really agree on it. Same thing. Some people wanted to be more particular and say sukara actually means intoxication. And other people wanted to be more comprehensive and say, well, it actually includes every single distracting behavior would actually be part of sukara. Some people like to answer more particular answers, and other people would like to give more comprehensive. Let's go back to la taqrabu. So this is his point number 3. For la taqrabu, he said, well, it doesn't actually mean to not approach. He said, because that would actually, if we're talking about not approaching. So let's say a person is in a state of basically drunk. Okay, is this talking about not approaching? He said no, because to not approach would be not لا تقربوا, it would be لا تقربوا. So then what is it? He said this is لا تقرأ with the fatha on the ra. He said that actually means don't engage in a particular action. In other words, don't engage. So it's not about approaching in proximity. This is not talking about proximity. This is actually talking about engagement. Engagement is what it's telling us not to do, an engagement in salah when we are drunk. Okay, so here's the thing. When we're talking about salah, then he said, well, let's say, what salah are we talking about? Are we talking about the actual prayer, or are we talking about a metaphor here? Let's see what he said. He said the majority actually said that it's talking about specific known prayer, the 5 daily prayers, exactly like that. And he said that's what Abu Hanifa had said. What's the evidence? Well, he said, because it's telling us, and so that you would know what you're saying. On another group of scholars, they said, no, this isn't saying don't engage in salah while you're actually drunk. The other group, they actually said, no, this is not talking about the actual prayer in activity, in action. They said, no, this is actually talking about the place of salah. Why? So that was what Shafi'i said. He said, simple. He said, I've got an evidence to prove that. What is it? He said, well, let's look at that ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said, لَهُدِّمَتْ صَوَامِعْ وَبِيَعْ وَصَلَوَاتٍ. He said in another ayah in Surah Al-Hajj, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was talking about why he had legislated jihad, and he said if jihad, fighting for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was not permitted, then you would have actually seen the destruction of different places of worship, whether we're talking about yeshivas or whether we're talking about places of worship for the Christians. In other words, the different sanctuary places, churches, etc., or even places of worship as mosques. So he said, look, so a salah is not exclusive to prayer in itself, the actual prayer, but it could also include a place. So he said the place of prayer could also be considered a salah. And he said, and what actually enhances that interpretation, he said, look, and he says, وَلَا جُنُبًا إِلَّا عَابِرِي سَبِيلٍ, and not when you're in a state of janaba, unless you're actually passing by. He said, إِلَّا, look at the context, he said. Look at the context. The context says, and you would not approach junub, and you approach salah unless you are passing by. Certainly, this is not talking about abiri sabil. This is not talking about you're passing by a prayer, because you don't pass by a prayer. You engage in a prayer. But here the context is it's talking about passing by the masjid. So there Shafi'i said, well, now you could see that this right here, this adding wall, this addition wall, is actually telling us that do not approach the prayer, the place of salah, and the place of salah, not when you're drunk, and certainly not when you are in a state of basically the aftermath of intimacy, unless you were just passing by, needed to fetch something, and that was basically it. So here he's basically looking at it. It's really interesting. You would really not think of it that way. These people are very, very smart. So they would take each and every single word and think deeply with it. They wouldn't just, go over the words out and we're done. No, they took the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and wanted to have that be the light that they would really scrutinize and think deeply in it. So another group, they said, well, this is this is not contradictory. They said, this is actually talking about one, the place of prayer and even prayer in itself, because it's taking you two together. The place of prayer that you, when you come to the masjid, what are you coming to the masjid for? Well, you come into the masjid for prayer. You would come together. You would all join in for one cause, which is prayer. So you don't engage in a prayer, whether in action or whether in place, when you're in a state of, let's say, inner intoxication, right there in where you're not focused, or outer intoxication or outer contamination. So contamination, whether inner contamination or outer contamination, don't be contaminated. Be in a place of inner purity, outer purity for salah. حتى تغتسلوا. Beautiful. It's like you're pure inside out, ready to embrace your salah, ready to be part of salah, ready to actually engage in salah to attain that khushu'. So that's why it's important to learn the fiqh of purity, because the fiqh of purity would basically give you the ways to bring about the focus on the inside. If you don't know how to do it, or if you thought you knew how to do it, the Quran would, in the sunnah, in the classes of fiqh would tell you how to approach. That's the intro to fiqh. That's why we're doing the intro to fiqh. It's going into the different key elements. Although in the beginning, when you're studying fiqh, this is real, ladies. When I went to study fiqh, this is real. When I entered Kulliyat al-Sharia, the teachers were giving us the different fiqh, the different rules, etc. It really felt like it was dry, it was boring. What are we getting to? I was really hoping, this is real. Before entering Kulliyat al-Sharia, I thought I was going to be in each and every single class. They were going to tell us about Yawm al-Akhirah. They were going to tell us about all these stories about the Sahaba, and we're just going to be, by the time we graduate, every time we approach our salah, we're just going to be crying and living in this moment of khushu', and yeah, we're going to be getting into that place. When I graduated, to be honest, I felt that I learned something so dry. I didn't feel it. It felt like I didn't get what I wanted. But it isn't until later that you started putting the pieces together. It's like, no, you learned those pieces, but put it into action. Put that into action. Once you put it into action and not learn those pieces like you're learning a math problem, but you're basically embracing it with your heart. You're connecting it. You're comprehending these elements. That is only when you'll start embracing it and putting it into action, and you'll start feeling the relationship between what you had learned and the relationship between connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the words. And that's why it's important to start ta'lamu, for you to learn, for you to process the idea, because without having the ilm, you're basically just basing things based on your hawa, based on your inclinations, based on your desires, and that would never lead you and drive you but to more and more of hawa feeding, of desire feeding, and you're going to find yourself stranded really next to shaitan, confused of where and what you're supposed to be doing. So that's why when you look at حَتَّى تَعْلَمُوا مَا تَقُولُونَ, it's really to give you an understanding. Now, the other thing is sukur is basically, of course, what's the opposite of sukr? It's basically to be awake, to be aware. Okay, when you look at that, and that's why in the ayah, إِنَّمَا سُكِّرَتْ أَبْصَارُنَا, when they said, well, our sights were basically blocked, we're basically locked, we couldn't actually see everything. So that's when they basically wanted to give themselves a justification to why they couldn't understand everything. They didn't talk about here the sight, they were actually talking about the insight. So in other words, in order to get to the insight, you need the basic knowledge. You need to get to that piece of it. So when you see all of that, it basically gives us that ilm in how do we attain khushu'ah, how do we attain that ilm, how do we attain that sense of spirituality. You need to take away the contamination on the inside, the contamination on the outside, the purification on the inside, and the purification on the outside. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, qum fa'anzir. He says to the Prophet ﷺ, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, oh you, the one that's all bundled up in your own blanket. You've got a mission to go to. Qum fa'anzir. You've got a mission. Get up. Don't stay. And this is important. There's no way that you can combine comfort and leadership. If you think that you can stay comfortable and at the same time become a leader and at the same time achieve, there's no way. In order to achieve, you got to get out of your comfort zone. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling the Prophet ﷺ. Qum fa'anzir. Who? You were in your comfort zone. You cannot be in your comfort zone and be on a mission at the same time. You cannot be in your comfort zone and at the same time be a leader. There's no way. They can't come together. In order for you to master, to achieve, get out of your comfort zone. You can't be gaming and at the same time basically excel in your schoolwork. There's no way. You can't be comfortable in your bed all the time and actually get to Jannah. You have to leave your warm blanket and leave your comfort in order to get up and actually go to the masjid or go to your dars or give up on probably those moments in where you're just engaging in fun and actually get out of your comfort zone. قُمْ فَأَنذِرْ وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. Not only until you recognize that the true center is your Lord Almighty, وَرَبَّكَ, and glorify your Lord Almighty. That is only when you're capable of recognizing that the true center is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to recognize it. وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. But then it's not enough. وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. Now, رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ is basically removing every contamination in whether that was regarding yourself as the center or whether that was regarding the society as the center, to actually consider that the real center is actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is what it means to remove the contamination. Contamination, the inner contamination is shirk. The inner contamination is glorifying yourself. The inner contamination is regarding anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as your center. Contamination is more than just outer contamination, is more than just your body. It's the inside of your brains. That's the most dangerous contamination. The most dangerous contamination is within your aqidah. So he said, رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. I want you to recognize that your Lord Almighty is your center. Kabbir means glorify. Kabbir means to make as a center. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. And purify your clothes, purify your garment. And this is not talking about, from dirt and all of that. This is talking about any contamination on the outside. You need to remove it. What contamination on the outside? Are we talking about just washing our clothes with soap? No. So the ayah continues, right? It's like, I don't want you to just removing the contamination off your clothes or your garments, and just to be very specific and garment. So he said, وَالرُّجْزَ فَهْجُرْ. No, it's actually removing any behavior or any behavior that might contaminate your actions, your behavior, your thought. وَالرُّجْزَ فَهْجُرْ. So like what? لا تمنن تستكثر. Don't brag about different things or focus or try to praise yourself in order to get other people's benefits, or somehow لا تمنن تستكثر. What is al-minna? Al-minna is basically when you're bragging about something in order to get the privileges from people. When do people do that? People do that when they're basically consider themselves as the center. So that's why the ayah was wanting us to understand that outer purification also relates to akhlaq, morality. How do you engage in good morality? You want to grow in your salah? Well, you need to remove all the contaminations that are inside your brain. You need to correct your vision, and you also need to correct your behavior. You need to remove any contamination on the body and connect with tahara, and also contamination within your behavior. And that's why, there is a poem, although it's attributed to Shafi'i, but there's a debate whether it was actually Shafi'i or another scholar. So he says, شكوت إلى وكيع سوء حفظي فأرشدني إلى ترك المعاصي وأخبرني بأن العلم نور ونور الله لا يهدى لعاصي. Said, I complained to Waki', who was actually his sheikh, that I couldn't focus on my ability to memorize. So he basically instructed him to leave and avoid sin. Why? He said, because sin, the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala / the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the light is the knowledge. There's no way that would be gifted to a person that is a sinner. You cannot want dunya or want akhirah and want dunya at the same time. You have to work towards a goal. ما جعل الله لرجل قلبين في جوفه. You can't actually have your heart be directed at two things at the same time. There's no way. So what am I supposed to do? Well, you have to put your focus in its place. You got to put your focus in its place, or else you're confused about your main mission. And that's why here, anything that basically takes away your focus is basically considered as sukur. So here, al-Qaffal, a very important scholar, Ya Allah, maybe we should do that. Noura, why don't we do that one day, in where we're talking about certain scholars, scholars of tafsir, scholars of fiqh, and talk about, a series of
Yeah,
scholars.
that sounds like a good idea.
I love
Sorry,
the
I'm at the
idea.
store. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I love the idea where, we're talking about a series of scholars, scholars of fiqh, scholars of hadith, scholars of tafsir. Well, that would be a great idea. That way we can relate with these scholars, because if we don't relate with the scholars, then, we're not relating with the main figures that embodied and embraced the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I love it. Anyhow, we're going to continue, inshallah. How long have we been doing the class for? How long has it been? Just don't want to go over. How long has it been? Maybe you guys can answer me.
I think it's been 2.5 hours. Has it?
What the I think about
Maybe I'm
now.
wrong. Okay. Okay, sorry.
1 hour? Okay.
What the
So, okay.
5 minutes, I think.
1 hour? Okay. So should we do another half hour, or should we stop here? Oh, my
However,
son,
yeah.
what? My son is saying
Keep
stop.
going.
Keep going.
However,
All right.
yeah. I mean, if you
25 more
carry on-
minutes. Okay, 25 more minutes. So let's see. حتى تعلموا ما تقولون. So then basically this is point number 7. He says, حتى تعلموا. He said it is basically right there when you look at al-ilm, what is knowledge? What makes knowledge? Here's the thing, is that when you look at sukr, there are different rulings that relate to intoxication. Is a person that is is in a state of intoxication, what if they actually divorce? This is a question that scholars debated about. If the person is drunk, and by the way, it's quite sad to say that drinking within the Muslim community is, unfortunately, it's actually a growing thing. And it's really sad how a lot of Muslims are not recognizing that drinking is what the Prophet ﷺ actually said, al-khaba'ith. It is actually the main thing that brings all the different sins. A person can drink, and then when they drink, they might actually kill somebody. They might actually do so many haram things without them recognizing, and bring about all the sins when it was just really starting with drinking. So, because of things relating to action, scholars actually discussed whether a person that actually is in a state of intoxication, whether if they were to divorce their wives, or if somebody was to actually divorce his wife, whether his divorce would actually be valid or not. Well, it wasn't just a person that is in a state of sukr, but there is something called ma'tuh. Who's al-ma'tuh? There's mental illness. There's a mental illness where a person can sometimes be at a state of a mental illness where their recognition of the world around them might not be at, let's call it, the best level. Well, let's look at schizophrenia. A person's schizophrenia, they're hearing sounds that's basically telling them to do things, but they're really confused. Okay, should we do it? Should we not do it? What's going on? Somebody else might actually be hearing, Wazwaz be hearing things. Sometimes not necessarily hearing things. They're confused about so many different things. It's a mental illness where their awareness of the society, awareness of themselves, awareness of the world around them is not at its best. In other words, there is not, let's say, an induced reason to basically, let's say, stop the mental process. It's not an induced reason, but it is a natural reason that basically had impaired the person from understanding things the right way, or at least understand it in the way that it really is. So this would be talking about an induced impairment. This would be a physical impairment. So whether we're looking at an induced impairment or we're talking about a physical impairment, that's when scholars actually discussed, well, the implication of that action. So the implication of that action, if we're talking about somebody that doesn't fully understand what they're doing, does that impairment actually mean that the actions are not going to be valid, or are they valid? Same thing if we're talking about somebody with OCD. Somebody with OCD, any mental impairment, okay, any mental impairment is going to be included within this. So person with OCD, did I make wudu? I would get people, Ya Allah, that's probably one of the hardest things. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala For the therapists that are trading and dealing with these people, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them the sabr. It is so hard. I would get people, with OCD, and they'd be calling me 7, 8, 9, 10, 50 times a day. And if I were to actually answer each and every phone call, I'm not helping them. You wouldn't be helping them by actually constantly following their OCD, because that thinking is not necessarily, if you think, well, let me explain it to them. Remember, they are mentally, at least, to a certain level, actually having an impairment. To actually think, well, let me explain it to them rationally, you're actually using the wrong thing. This person has a rational impairment. This person is actually going through an impairment. So to actually think, well, let me explain it to them, you're just really wasting your time. So sometimes there are certain disabilities that actually require medication. And there's nothing wrong with actually taking medications for certain mental illnesses, because whether it's basically just different impulses in the brain or whatever it is, they'll have their explanation, but certain medications are actually necessary for these people to go through the healing, to go through the treatment. Now, the question right now, we're not going to discuss whether they should get medicated and how much of a medication, or whether and how well these medications work. This is not here the discussion. The discussion is, well, their divorce. If this person that has a mental illness, OCD, schizophrenia, different illnesses, bipolar, this is very common. What if they were to divorce, and knowing that even should we advise them to pray, or are they held accountable for their prayer or not? Well, they don't fully understand, do they? How much do they understand? How much should I tell a person that is schizophrenic to pray? What about a person with bipolar? What about if this person was married and he's told his wife, you're taliq, or he started wondering, I don't know if I did say it. And in some cases, they would come to you, am I divorced? I think I said it to my wife, and they didn't, and their wife, she would say, I don't know what he's talking about. He's just getting into this impulsivity, or he's just going into this kind of obsessiveness where he didn't even say anything. And it'll be not half an hour later, it would be in the same spot. They would be eating together, and then he would all of a sudden, say, did I just divorce you? It's like, we were just eating. You didn't say anything. You just took your I don't know, your sandwich, and you were just eating. You didn't say a single word. And here's the recording of it. But still, they'll get into this obsessive, deep thinking. Well, they'll be confused about everything. So for this reason, scholars had differences of opinions. I'll make the story short. If we're talking about whether a person that is intoxicated, whether their divorce is valid or not, pay attention to this one. This debate didn't only happen between the scholars of fiqh, but this debate actually happened between the Sahaba themselves. In where the first group, they said a person that is drunk, if they divorce, their divorce is not valid. And you had some Sahaba even say that. Why? They said, well, that's because when you want to consider anybody's action as valid, there has to be that the words would actually match a person's intention. If the person's intention is not matching their words, therefore their words would just be gibberish. And they said exactly like you would see in Salah. Their words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, حَتَّى تَعْلَمُوا مَا تَقُولُونَ. So if the person is not capable of understanding their words, the words are not matching what they know, what they believe, then that actually acts as gibberish and not necessarily what the words were intended to be for. That was the first opinion. The second opinion, they said it is valid. Why? They said, well, this is an induced intoxication, induced impairment, and not a natural impairment or a disability. They induce such impairment, and therefore, to basically hold them accountable for the induced impairment, just like we held them accountable for drinking, we're going to hold them accountable for every single action that they basically were a result of. Let's just give an example. Let's say this person was intoxicated and they killed somebody. Are we going to say, well, they're not held accountable for that killing because they were intoxicated? Are we going to say that too? This is they are so smart. It's like, if you're going to say their divorce is not valid, then you're going to say that when they kill somebody that it's not valid too, because then you're actually saying that any type of an action that resulted from this impairment is basically going to be not valid, and they're not going to be held accountable for it. And then we're going to have people drinking left and right and say, well, I'm not going to be held accountable. Or they can just stand up in court and say, well, sorry, but I was actually drinking and driving at the time, so I didn't mean it. Oh, okay, got it. We'll just dismiss you then. That makes no sense. You see that? It's so smart. They were like, well, let's look into this. We cannot consider that just because they couldn't understand what they were saying, that we could just dismiss their behavior as well. They basically had some kind of an impairment, therefore they shouldn't be held accountable. You could see right there, isn't that so smart? It's like, oh. All right, I absolutely love fiqh. It's basically the physics of thought. It's the physics of Islamic law. It's like you go beyond. All right. So what is the preponderant? The preponderant, wallahu alam, is that a person, if they are drunk, they are held accountable for their action, and therefore the implication of this induced impairment is going to be considered. And they cannot claim, well, I was not aware and I divorced my wife. Well, you induced it. Maybe next time you should consider to actually understand what you're doing. And plus, how do we know whether you were really drunk or the level of drunkenness that you were actually in? Maybe you are just lying about that you were drunk at the time and you faked it and you probably just thought that you could get away with it. So that's why we have to actually hold people accountable. But if we're talking about a person with, let's call it a natural impairment or a mental illness, in that situation, for the people that are mentally ill, their divorce would really depend on one. We would ask psychiatrists in that situation whether that person, so in other words, we would have to have a psychiatrist evaluate that person's illness, and the psychiatrist would tell me how much of an understanding does that person have of what they're doing. And of course, the psychiatrist would rate their ability to understand, the ability to process, the ability to think about, really, connect the two sides, the two sides of one, the action, and also the intention together. So in situations where we might actually have those mental illnesses where it's not a definitive answer of whether this person is capable of understanding everything or not, or whether they really are capable, in situations we can have a hired guardian, and or not necessarily hired, but an assigned guardian for that person, il-wali. They would be il-wali in whether we're talking about an action like a divorce or whether we're talking about a transaction, there would be an assigned guardian to basically act on their behalf. So in that situation, the divorce would not be valid, even if it's a man, until the wali basically approves or disapproves that behavior. It must be yet in the benefit of that particular person. All right. It must be in their benefit. It must be for their cause. And there would be the higher authority / government, or basically the area that would be in charge to make sure that they're going over these guardians' actions to make sure that it's going in their favor. And that's actually going in accordance with the ayah that we talked about before in Surah Nisa, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says about the yatama, in where فَإِنْ آنَسْتُم مِّنْهُمْ رُشْدًا فَدَفَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ أَمْوَالَهُم. If you sense rushd, if you sense sensibility, if you sense maturity, then give them their money. So where this is not talking about money, but this is talking about the authority and what they would actually later develop. Well, this is not just talking about the orphans only, but anybody that goes within that category, whether it's immaturity or whether it's mental impairment, then in that situation, we would basically have a wali to act on their behalf. In other words, they would become like a guardian or a guardian ad litem. They would be the ones to actually assist in making sure that the decisions are made in their favor, whether we're talking about divorce, whether we're talking about child custody, whether we're talking about transactions, whether we're talking about making financial agreements, etc. But that would basically be done through that particular guardian. So I hope I explained that one. You could see, I love it. I can go on and on, ladies.
I'm just a little bit confused. So the psychiatrist would have to diagnose that person, you're saying, as
right. Absolutely.
Okay.
So the psychiatrist would evaluate that person. They would evaluate their state at that time, at least during that time of, I guess, the action that there's a dispute about during the trial. They would investigate and diagnose them at that time, and also diagnose and explain to the court whenever there's a dispute, explain how the level, I guess, the level of their understanding, their level of their ability to process things, and that's basically what it's all about. We cannot ignore the experts and their explanation in helping us understand the situation. We definitely need to have the experts on board before we actually make a judgment. So
okay, Jazakallah khair.
Yep. So, and that's the same thing. I mean, we don't only consider the psychiatrist expertise, but the specialty is really important. So we would take specialists in each and every single field. That's why Islam is different than any other legislating system, in where, yes, it does consider al-wahi, but it also takes in the experts, explanations, the research. So whether we're talking about, in this situation, we're talking about mental impairment, but we would also consider, if we're talking about, let's say, a financial dispute, we would talk about, the experts, accountants, bankers, whatever it is. They would also explain to us. Let's talk about medical impairment. Then we would need experts within probably medicine or whatever specialty before we would make a final judgment. So that's extremely important to, just understand that in fiqh, we don't just consider what the past scholars had said, but we would generate, along with the data that was given to us, the different information to help us make the statement, the judgment that matches the intellectual capacities that we had learned with time. So we use these as let's call them helping tools to make sure that we're understanding the Quran and Sunnah, and also using the human mind / science to help us make sure that we're understanding things in a better way and with a complete picture than a very simplistic and a very narrowed picture, or at least vision. So that's why we'll, inshallah, end right here, inshallah, because we've got a long way to go, but inshallah, we'll continue next week. Just remind me where we left off at. So we're taking this one. See Abu Hanifa. Yeah, that's it. And barakallahu fikum, inshallah. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. وإياكم Raneem, mashallah, I could see the dedication, girl. I'm so proud of you. Raneem, mashallah, very proud of you. And I know you had attended both classes, the class Intro to Fiqh, and now this one. It's a lot of hours, so we're talking about almost 3.5 hours. Good for you. Good job. Good job.
You guys don't be shy to ask questions.
Yeah, don't be shy to ask questions. Even if it's off topic, that's okay too, inshallah. Allah yabanku. So we'll end right here, inshallah. We'll see you. I'm hoping to actually do Wednesdays. Let me, inshallah, because we really need to do 2 classes a week of tafsir and not 1 class a week in tafsir. So let's see what we could do. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'll see you all. Assalamu alaikum.
جزاك الله خيرا. السلام عليكم.
وإياكم وعليكم السلام.